The big meeting room at the Galactic Archaeological Institute was full of students and teachers from many different planets. Jake Morrison sat in his usual spot in the third row, looking around at all the strange faces and forms around him. There were tall blue aliens with 4 arms, small green ones with big eyes, and floating jellyfish-like creatures that glowed softly in the dim light. Dean Kelther walked to the front of the room. He was one of the Vortanians, with skin that looked like crystal and changed colors when he was upset or excited. Today his skin was a cold blue-white color, which meant he was being very serious about something important. Jake had been at the Institute for 2 years now, studying to become an archaeologist like his father. Back on Earth, he loved learning about old civilizations and finding lost treasures from the past. Most of the other students were happy to study things from books and computer files, but Jake always wanted to go out and explore real places. The dean raised all 4 of his arms to get everyone's attention. The room became quiet very quickly. When Dean Kelther wanted to make an announcement, everyone listened carefully. "I have called this meeting to discuss the planet Kepler 442b, the dean said in his deep voice that seemed to come from inside his crystal chest. "Our science teams have been studying this world for many months now. They have found something very interesting but also very dangerous." Jake leaned forward in his seat. He had heard other students talking about Kepler 442b in the cafeteria. Some said there were ancient caves there with old paintings and maybe even treasure. Others said it was just another empty rock floating in space. "The caves on this planet contain many artifacts from a very old civilization," Dean Kelther continued. "The paintings on the walls show scenes that we have never seen before. There are also strange objects made from materials we do not understand. This could be one of the most important discoveries in our galaxy's history." A student from the insect-like zephyrite species raised one of her 6 arms. "Dean Kelther, when do we start planning the expedition to explore these caves?" The dean's crystal skin suddenly turned a darker blue, almost purple. This was not a good sign. Jake had learned to read the dean's moods by watching his skin color change. "That is exactly why I called this meeting," Dean Kelther said, his voice becoming even more serious. "There will be no expedition to Kepler 442b. The caves are far too dangerous for any of our students or faculty to explore." The room filled with surprised voices as students began talking to each other. Jake felt his heart sink. He had been hoping to join the expedition team when it was organized. Exploring those ancient caves sounded like the most exciting thing. He could imagine. Dean Kelther raised his arms again for silence. "Our geological surveys show that the cave system is not stable. The rock could collapse at any moment, trapping or killing anyone inside. The deeper tunnels contain poisonous gases that could kill even with our best protective equipment. Most importantly, the remote scanning shows evidence of ancient defensive systems that might still be active after thousands of years." Professor Martinez, Jake's human advisor, stood up from her seat near the front. "Dean Kelther, surely with proper planning and safety equipment, a small team could at least conduct a preliminary survey of the outer chambers?" "Absolutely not," the dean replied, his skin now turning an angry red color. "I will not risk the life of even one student or faculty member for the sake of archaeological discovery. The potential knowledge we might gain is not worth the certain danger we would face." Jake felt a familiar feeling rising in his chest. It was the same feeling he got when his parents told him not to climb the big oak tree in their backyard, or when his teachers said the old abandoned buildings near his school were too dangerous to explore. It wasn't that he wanted to disobey authority, but he had always been curious about places that other people were afraid to go. "But Dean," said Dr. Chun from the history department, "the artifacts visible in our scans could revolutionize our understanding of galactic civilization. Surely the risk is worth considering?" Dean Kelther's skin flashed bright red for a moment. "The decision is final. No member of this institution will travel to Kepler 442b. No expeditions will be planned. No research proposals involving those caves will be approved. The planet is officially off limits to all Institute personnel." After the meeting ended, Jake walked slowly back to his dormitory room. His roommate Liu was already there, reading a textbook about quantum archaeology. Liu was also human, but he was much more careful and cautious than Jake. He always followed rules and never took unnecessary risks. "What did you think about the dean's announcement?" Jake asked as he sat down on his bed. Liu looked up from his book. "I think Dean Kelther is being smart. Why would anyone want to risk their life exploring dangerous caves when there are so many safe archaeological sites throughout the galaxy? There are plenty of other interesting places to study." Jake nodded, but inside he was thinking something completely different. That night, after Liu had gone to sleep, Jake sat at his computer terminal and began researching everything he could find. About Kepler 442b, the official reports described the planet as a super-Earth, with gravity about 30% stronger than Earth's. The atmosphere was mostly nitrogen and oxygen, similar to Earth but with slightly different ratios. Most importantly for Jake, humans could breathe the air with only basic filtration equipment. The cave system was massive, extending for hundreds of kilometers underground. The remote scans showed chambers as large as sports stadiums, connected by tunnels that formed a complex network throughout the planet's crust. The paintings visible through long-range imaging showed humanoid figures alongside creatures that looked similar to several modern galactic species. Jake studied the geological reports that mentioned structural instabilities. The data seemed to be based on very limited scanning from orbit. No one had actually sent probes into the caves or conducted detailed structural analysis. The warnings about poisonous gases were based on atmospheric readings that showed elevated levels of rare minerals, but nothing that appeared immediately toxic to humans. Most interesting of all, the ancient defensive systems that Dean Kelther had mentioned seemed to be based entirely on speculation and folklore. Several galactic species had legends about dangerous ancient sites, but there was no concrete evidence that the caves on Kepler 442b contained any active technology. Jake leaned back in his chair and stared at the star map on his computer screen. Kepler 442b was only 3 days' travel from the Institute, well within the range of the small personal shuttles that advanced students were allowed to use for independent research projects. He thought about his father, who had been an archaeologist on Earth before humans joined the galactic community. His father had always told him that the greatest discoveries were made by people who were willing to go places that others considered too dangerous or too difficult to explore. "The safe sites have all been picked clean," his father used to say. "If you want to find something truly important, you have to be willing to take some risks." Jake spent the rest of the night reading everything he could find about cave exploration techniques, safety procedures, and the specific environmental conditions on Kepler 442b. By morning, he had made up his mind. He was going to find a way to explore those caves, with or without the dean's permission. Jake spent 3 days planning his secret mission to Kepler 442b. He knew he could not tell anyone at the Institute what he really planned to do. If Dean Kelther found out, Jake would be expelled from school and probably banned from ever working as an archaeologist. The first problem was getting permission to use one of the Institute's personal shuttles. Students were allowed to borrow shuttles for independent research projects, but they had to submit detailed proposals explaining where they were going and what they planned to study. Jake could not write "Explore the Forbidden Caves on Kepler 442b" in his proposal. Instead, Jake wrote a proposal to study mineral formations on uninhabited asteroids in the Outer Rim territories. He included coordinates for a small asteroid field that was actually just a refueling station on the way to Kepler 442b. The proposal looked boring and safe, exactly the kind of project that professors would approve without asking too many questions. Professor Martinez approved Jake's proposal the same day he submitted it. She barely looked at the details before signing the approval form. "Just be careful out there, Jake," she said as she handed him the signed papers. "And make sure you file your progress reports on schedule. The Institute likes to keep track of where all our students are." Jake nodded and promised to be very careful. He felt a little guilty about lying to Professor Martinez, who had always been kind and helpful to him. But he told himself that he would only be gone for a week, and if he found something important in the caves, everyone would understand why he had to bend the rules. The next step was preparing his equipment. Jake had been studying cave exploration for months, so he knew exactly what he would need. He packed his personal shuttle with portable atmospheric processors that would keep the air clean and safe to breathe. He loaded gravity anchors that would help him move safely in the stronger gravity of Kepler 442b. He brought seismic stabilizers that could detect dangerous rock movements before they became cave-ins. Most importantly, Jake packed a complete archaeological kit with 3D mapping scanners, sample containers, preservation fields, and high-resolution cameras. If he was going to risk his career and possibly his life exploring these caves, he wanted to make sure he could properly document whatever he found. Jake also packed enough food and water for 3 weeks, even though he only planned to be gone for 1 week. His father had taught him to always prepare for emergencies when exploring unknown places. Better to have too much supplies than too little. His father used to say. The night before his departure, Jake had trouble sleeping. He kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if the caves really were unstable and collapsed while he was inside? What if there were poisonous gases that his equipment could not filter? What if the ancient defensive systems were real and still active? But Jake also thought about all the amazing things he might discover. The paintings in the caves might tell the story of a civilization that existed before any of the current galactic species evolved. The artifacts might contain technology that could advance galactic science by hundreds of years. This could be the most important archaeological discovery in history. Early the next morning, Jake loaded the last of his equipment into his personal shuttle, the Wanderer. The shuttle was small but reliable, designed for long-range exploration missions. Jake had modified it slightly over the past 2 years, adding extra fuel tanks and improved scanning equipment. Liu was still asleep when Jake left their dormitory room. Jake had told his roommate that he was leaving early to get a head start on his asteroid survey mission. Liu had wished him good luck and gone back to sleep. The launch bay was quiet in the early morning hours. Only a few maintenance workers were around, checking other shuttles and refueling larger ships. Jake completed his pre-flight checks quickly and efficiently. Everything looked good for departure. As the Wanderer lifted off from the Institute's orbital platform, Jake felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He was committed now. There was no turning back without answering a lot of difficult questions about why he had changed his mind. The journey to Kepler 442b would take 18 hours through hyperspace. Jake had plenty of time to review his plans and double-check his equipment. He spent the first few hours studying the detailed scans of the cave system, trying to plan the safest and most efficient route through the tunnels. The caves had dozens of entrances scattered across the planet's surface, but the largest and most accessible was located near the equator in the middle of a vast canyon system. This entrance was big enough for Jake to walk through easily, and it connected to the main network of tunnels and chambers. During the long hyperspace journey, Jake also reviewed everything he knew about cave safety procedures. He had practiced using all of his equipment many times in the Institute's training facilities. He knew how to set up atmospheric processors, how to anchor safety lines, and how to recognize signs of structural instability. Most importantly, Jake had programmed his shuttle's computer with detailed emergency procedures if something went wrong and he did not return to the surface within a specified time. The shuttle would automatically send a distress signal back to the Institute with his exact location. When the Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 442b, Jake got his first real look at the planet. It was beautiful, with blue-green oceans and brown continents covered with strange geometric patterns that looked almost artificial. The massive canyon system that contained the caves cut across one entire hemisphere like a giant scar. Jake piloted the shuttle through the planet's atmosphere, following his planned flight path to the largest cave entrance. The landscape below looked barren but not hostile. There were no signs of current life, but the geometric patterns on the surface suggested that this planet had once been home to a very advanced civilization. The cave entrance was exactly where the orbital scans had indicated it would be. Jake landed the Wanderer on a flat area about 100 meters from the opening. The entrance was huge, roughly circular, and about 10 meters across. It disappeared into darkness after just a few meters, like a giant mouth opening into the planets. Interior. Jake spent an hour setting up his base camp next to the shuttle. He established a communication relay that would boost his radio signals from inside the caves. He tested all of his equipment one final time to make sure everything was working properly. He also set up an automatic beacon that would guide him back to the surface if he got lost in the tunnel system. Finally, Jake put on his environmental suit and checked the seals. The suit would protect him from any dangerous gases and provide emergency life support if his atmospheric processors failed. He also attached a safety line to an anchor point near the cave entrance, giving him a direct route back to the surface. Standing at the mouth of the cave, Jake felt the same excitement he had felt as a child when he explored the woods behind his house or investigated abandoned buildings in his neighborhood. This was what he lived for, the thrill of discovering something new and unknown. Jake activated his helmet lights and stepped into the darkness. The beam of his lights revealed smooth rock walls covered with intricate carvings and paintings. The artwork was unlike anything Jake had ever seen before, combining realistic images of humanoid figures with abstract, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move in the flickering light. The first chamber was enormous, easily large enough to hold a football stadium. Jake's lights could not reach the far walls or the ceiling. As he walked deeper into the chamber, his footsteps echoed strangely, creating complex patterns of sound that seemed almost musical. Jake activated his 3D mapping scanner and began documenting everything he could see. The scanner created a detailed digital model of the chamber, recording the exact size and shape of the space as well as high-resolution images of all the artwork on the walls. After 2 hours of careful exploration, Jake had mapped the entire first chamber and documented dozens of paintings and carvings. He had found no signs of structural instability, no evidence of poisonous gases, and no indication of any active defensive systems. The cave seemed remarkably safe and stable. More importantly, Jake was beginning to realize that this site was far more significant than anyone at the Institute had imagined. The artwork suggested a level of sophistication and technological advancement that exceeded anything in the current galactic civilization. This was not just an archaeological site. It was a window into a lost chapter of galactic history. Jake spent his second day underground exploring deeper into the cave system than anyone had ever gone before. His 3D mapping scanner had already recorded over 40 kilometers of tunnels and passages, creating a detailed digital map that showed the incredible complexity of the underground network. The cave system was like a giant three-dimensional maze, with tunnels branching off in every direction and chambers connected by passages that twisted and turned through the rock. Some chambers were as small as closets, while others were large enough to hold entire cities. Each new area Jake discovered was more amazing than the last. The walls throughout the cave system were covered with paintings and carvings that told an incredible story. Jake saw images of humanoid figures working alongside beings that looked exactly like several modern galactic species, Vortanians, Veshans, Luminari, and others. But these paintings were clearly ancient, possibly thousands or even millions of years old. The artwork showed scenes of great cities being built, massive ships traveling between stars, and complex machines that Jake could not identify. Most interesting of all, many of the paintings showed humanoid figures that looked remarkably similar to modern humans, suggesting that Jake's own species might have a much longer galactic history than anyone had realized. As Jake moved deeper into the cave system, he began to notice that the tunnels were not entirely natural. The rock walls had been reinforced with some kind of advanced material that looked like a combination of crystal and metal. This reinforcement material was incredibly strong and showed no signs of age or deterioration, even after thousands of years. Jake tested the reinforcement material with his geological scanner and discovered that it was unlike anything in the Institute's databases. The material seemed to be a hybrid of organic and inorganic compounds, created using technology that was far beyond current galactic science. This explained why the caves were so stable despite their enormous size and age. On his third day underground, Jake made the discovery that would change everything he thought he knew about galactic history. He was exploring a passage that led downward at a steep angle, following his safety line deeper into the planet's crust. The passage opened into a chamber that was different from all the others he had seen. This chamber was perfectly spherical, about 50 meters in diameter, with a smooth domed ceiling that seemed to glow with its own light. At the center of the chamber stood a structure that defied easy description. It was roughly pyramidal in shape, but composed of flowing curves and geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as Jake moved around it. The structure was about 10 meters, tall and covered with symbols that glowed with a soft blue-white light. These were the same symbols Jake had seen carved around the cave entrance, but here they were alive with energy, pulsing in complex patterns that almost seemed to be some kind of language or code. Jake approached the structure slowly, documenting everything with his cameras and scanners. As he got closer, he could see that the base of the structure contained what looked like interface panels, with shapes that seemed designed for hands very similar to human hands. There were also smaller panels that might have been designed for the different appendages of various galactic species. Jake spent several hours studying the structure from every angle, trying to understand its purpose. The symbols on its surface seemed to respond to his presence, glowing brighter when he got close and dimming when he moved away. The interface panels showed signs of recent use, despite the obvious age of the structure. Finally, Jake worked up the courage to touch one of the interface panels. The moment his gloved hand made contact with the smooth surface, the entire structure came alive with light and sound. Holographic displays materialized in the air around him, showing star charts, technical diagrams, and what appeared to be vast databases of information. Jake stumbled backward in surprise, his heart pounding with excitement and fear. The holographic displays followed his movement, adjusting their position so he could see them clearly from any angle. The information was overwhelming. Thousands of star charts, showing the locations of planets and civilizations throughout the galaxy. Technical specifications for machines and technologies that were centuries ahead of current science, and historical records that seemed to span millions of years. As Jake studied the holographic displays, he began to understand that this was not just an ancient monument or artwork. This was a repository of knowledge left behind by a civilization that had explored and cataloged the entire galaxy long before any of the current species had achieved spaceflight. The structure was essentially a library or database designed to preserve and share information across vast periods of time. The star charts were particularly fascinating. They showed the locations of hundreds of planets throughout the galaxy, with detailed information about their climates, resources, and potential for supporting life. Many of the planets were familiar to Jake from his studies, worlds that were now home to various galactic species. But the charts also showed many other worlds that were apparently uninhabited or unknown to current galactic civilization. Most importantly, the charts showed the locations of dozens of sites similar to the one Jake was exploring. Each site was marked with the same glowing symbols, suggesting that they were all part of the same ancient network of knowledge repositories. If Jake was right, there were similar caves and structures scattered throughout the galaxy, each containing vast amounts of information about galactic history and technology. Jake spent the next several hours downloading and documenting as much information as he could. His portable data storage devices filled up quickly with star charts, technical diagrams, historical records, and linguistic databases. The ancient civilization had apparently been very thorough in their record-keeping, documenting everything, from the evolution of various species to the development of advanced technologies. The historical records were the most incredible part of the discovery. They suggested that this ancient civilization had not just observed the development of galactic species, they had actively guided and influenced it. The records showed evidence of genetic modifications, technological transfers, and cultural interventions that had helped various species develop intelligence and achieve spaceflight. According to the records, The ancient civilization had been particularly interested in species that showed curiosity, creativity, and willingness to explore dangerous or unknown places. They had identified these traits as essential for the long-term survival and advancement of intelligent life in the galaxy. Jake realized with growing excitement that humans seemed to fit this profile perfectly. The records showed extensive documentation of human development on Earth, including detailed genetic analyses and behavioral studies. The ancient civilization had apparently been monitoring human development for thousands of years, waiting for the right moment to reveal their knowledge repositories. The database also contained detailed instructions for accessing and using the information stored in the other repository sites. Each site was apparently specialized, focusing on different aspects of galactic knowledge. Some contained advanced technologies, others held historical records, and still others preserved cultural and artistic achievements. As Jake continued to explore the database, he found references to defensive systems that were designed to protect the repositories from unauthorized access. But these systems were not the dangerous traps that Dean Kelther had feared. Instead, they were sophisticated screening mechanisms that evaluated the intentions and capabilities of anyone who approached the sites. The defensive systems were programmed to allow access only to species that demonstrated the right combination of intelligence, curiosity, and peaceful intentions. Species that tried to use force or showed hostile intentions would be gently discouraged from entering the repositories, but not harmed. Jake realized that his own approach to the caves had probably triggered the defensive system's evaluation protocols. His willingness to explore alone, his careful documentation of everything he found, and his obvious respect for the ancient artifacts had apparently convinced the systems that he was worthy of access to the full database. By the end of his third day underground, Jake had downloaded more information than he could possibly analyze in months or even years. His data storage devices contained star charts showing the locations of dozens of other repository sites, technical specifications for technologies that could revolutionize galactic civilization, and historical records that would completely change the understanding of galactic development. Most importantly, Jake had discovered that the caves on Kepler 442b were not dangerous at all. They were exactly the opposite. They were a gift from an ancient civilization to the species that would eventually inherit the galaxy. The warnings and prohibitions from Dean Kelther had been based on fear and misunderstanding, not on actual danger. Jake knew that he had to return to the Institute and share his discoveries with the galactic scientific community. This was too important to keep secret and too valuable to be ignored because of excessive caution. The ancient civilization had left these repositories specifically for species like humans, curious, brave, and willing to take risks in the pursuit of knowledge. Jake's journey back to the Galactic Archaeological Institute was the longest 18 hours of his life. His shuttle's data storage systems were packed with terabytes of information from the ancient repository, and his equipment bay contained dozens of carefully preserved artifacts that he had collected from throughout the cave system during the hyperspace journey. Jake organized his findings and prepared his presentation. He knew that the faculty at the Institute would not easily accept his claims. Dean Kelther in particular would be angry that Jake had violated the prohibition against exploring Kepler 442b. Jake needed to present his evidence in a way that would overcome their skepticism and demonstrate the incredible importance of his discoveries. Jake had brought back several types of physical evidence. The most impressive were the interface devices he had found scattered throughout the cave system. These devices were clearly designed for humanoid hands, with controls and displays that seemed perfectly suited for human use. Each device contained crystal matrices that stored vast amounts of information in formats that Jake's computer could barely begin to decode. Jake had also collected samples of the mysterious reinforcement material that strengthened the cave walls. His preliminary analysis showed that the material was a hybrid of organic and synthetic compounds, created using manufacturing techniques that were completely unknown to current galactic science. The material was incredibly strong, completely resistant to corrosion, and showed no signs of aging despite being thousands of years old. Most importantly, Jake had documented everything with high-resolution cameras and 3D scanners. His digital records showed the exact layout of the cave system, detailed images of every painting and carving, and complete scans of the central repository structure. No one would be able to claim that his discoveries were fake or exaggerated. When the Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace near the Institute's orbital platform, Jake was surprised to see several security shuttles waiting for him. As he approached the docking bay, his communications system crackled to life with an urgent message from Dean Kelther. "Student Morrison, you will report to Conference Room Beta immediately upon docking. Do not unload any equipment or materials from your shuttle until you have been debriefed by Institute security." Jake's heart sank. Somehow, the Dean had discovered where he had really gone. Jake wondered if his communication relay had been detected, or if the Institute had been monitoring his shuttle's navigation systems. Either way, he was clearly in serious trouble. The docking bay was crowded with faculty members and security personnel when Jake's shuttle touched down. Professor Martinez was there. Looking worried and disappointed, Dr. Chun from the history department was also present, along with several other professors that Jake recognized. Most ominously, Dean Kelther himself was waiting at the airlock, his crystal skin glowing an angry red color. "Student Morrison," Dean Kelther said as Jake emerged from his shuttle, "you have violated direct orders and endangered yourself through reckless behavior. Before we discuss the disciplinary consequences of your actions, you will explain exactly what you were doing on Kepler 442b. Jake took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. "Dean Kelther, I went to Kepler 442b because I believe the dangers have been exaggerated. I wanted to see for myself whether the caves were really as unstable and hazardous as the reports claimed." "And what did you find?" Professor Martinez asked, her voice mixing concern with curiosity. "I found that the caves are not dangerous at all," Jake replied. "They are reinforced with advanced materials that make them more stable than most modern buildings. There are no poisonous gases, no unstable rock formations, and no active defensive systems that pose any threat to explorers." Dean Kelther's skin flashed brighter red. "Even if that were true, you still violated direct orders and risked your life based on your own amateur assessment of the situation. What could possibly justify such reckless behavior?" Jake looked around at the assembled faculty members and made his decision. "I found something that will change our understanding of galactic history forever. The caves contain a repository of knowledge left by an ancient civilization that existed millions of years before any of our current species achieved spaceflight." The docking bay fell silent. Several of the professors exchanged skeptical glances, while others leaned forward with obvious interest. Dean Kelther's skin shifted from red to purple, indicating extreme agitation. "That is an extraordinary claim," Dr. Chun said carefully. "Do you have any evidence to support such an assertion?" Jake gestured toward his shuttle. "I have terabytes of data, dozens of physical artifacts, and complete documentation of a repository structure that contains technology centuries ahead of anything in our current civilization." Professor Martinez stepped forward. "Jake, I think we should move this discussion to a more appropriate venue. Conference Room Beta has better facilities for reviewing complex data." The impromptu gathering moved to the conference room, where Jake began setting up his presentation equipment. Word had spread quickly through the Institute's communication networks, and the room filled with curious faculty members and advanced students from every department. Jake started his presentation with the 3D map of the cave system. The holographic display showed the incredible complexity and scale of the underground network, with hundreds of chambers connected by thousands of kilometers of tunnels. The assembled faculty gasped in amazement as they realized the true scope of what Jake had discovered. "This cave system is not a natural formation," Jake explained as he manipulated the 3D display to show different sections. "It was constructed by an advanced civilization using materials and techniques that we do not currently understand. The entire network is reinforced and stabilized using a hybrid, organic-synthetic material that shows no signs of deterioration after thousands of years." Jake then showed images of the paintings and carvings throughout the cave system. The artwork depicted scenes of advanced technology, interstellar travel, and interactions between humanoid figures and beings that looked remarkably similar to several current galactic species. These paintings suggest that the ancient civilization had contact with the ancestors of our current galactic species, Jake continued. But more than contact, the artwork shows evidence of genetic modification, technological transfer, and cultural guidance that help various species develop intelligence and achieve spaceflight. Professor Yilmaz raised one of her tentacles. Jake, these claims are extraordinary. Even if the artwork is authentic, how can you be certain of your interpretation? Jake smiled and activated the central portion of his presentation. Because the ancient civilization left us a complete database explaining everything they did. The conference room erupted in excited conversation as Jake showed recordings of the repository structure and its holographic displays, the star charts, technical diagrams, and historical records were clearly beyond anything that could be faked or misinterpreted. The repository contains detailed records of galactic development spanning millions of years, Jake explained. It includes genetic analyses of dozens of species, technical specifications for advanced technologies, and most importantly, the locations of similar repositories throughout the galaxy. Dean Kelther had been silent throughout most of Jake's presentation, but now he spoke up. Even if we accept that your findings are authentic, you still violated direct orders and endangered yourself. The risks were deemed too great by qualified experts. But there were no risks, Jake replied firmly. The dangers described in the original reports were based on incomplete data and unfounded speculation. The ancient civilization specifically designed these repositories to be safe and accessible to species that demonstrated the right combination of curiosity, intelligence, and peaceful intentions. Jake then presented his most compelling evidence, the physical artifacts he had brought back from the caves. The interface devices were clearly designed for humanoid hands, and they contained information storage systems that were far beyond current galactic technology. The samples of reinforcement material showed properties that violated several known laws of physics. According to the repository database, Jake continued, there are dozens of similar sites throughout the galaxy. Each site specializes in different aspects of ancient knowledge, technology, history, culture, and science. This discovery could accelerate our civilization's development by thousands of years. Dr. Foster from the Xenorchaeology Department examined one of the interface devices with obvious excitement. Jake, the implications of what you're showing us are staggering. If these repositories really exist throughout the galaxy, each containing similar amounts of information, it would be the greatest archaeological discovery in galactic history, Professor Martinez finished, and it would revolutionize our understanding of how intelligent life developed in our galaxy. Jake nodded. The ancient civilization was apparently very selective about which species they helped and guided. According to their records, they looked for species that showed curiosity, creativity, and willingness to explore dangerous or unknown places. They identified these traits as essential for long-term survival and advancement. The room fell silent as the implications of Jake's words sank in. The news of Jake's discovery spread through the galactic community faster than anyone had expected. Within hours of his presentation at the Institute, reports were being transmitted to universities, research centers, and government facilities. On dozens of worlds throughout known space, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Scientists who had spent their entire careers studying galactic archaeology suddenly found their understanding of history completely overturned. Government officials struggled to comprehend the implications of ancient repositories containing advanced technologies. Military leaders worried about the strategic advantages that different species might gain from accessing the ancient knowledge. Jake found himself at the center of the biggest scientific controversy in galactic history. Some experts praised his courage and initiative in making such an important discovery. Others criticized his methods and questioned whether a single human student should have been allowed to make such momentous decisions without proper authorization. Dean Kelther called an emergency meeting of the Institute's senior faculty to discuss how to proceed. The conference room was packed with professors, researchers, and administrative officials from throughout the galactic community. Representatives from the major species governments had also arrived to observe the proceedings and ensure their interests were protected. "The question before us," Dean Kelther announced to the assembled group, "is not whether student Morrison's discovery is authentic. Our preliminary analysis of his evidence confirms that the Kepler 442b repository is genuine and contains information of unprecedented scientific value. The question is how we should proceed to investigate the other repository sites he has identified." Professor Martinez stood up from her seat near the front of the room. "Dean Kelther, I believe we need to organize immediate expeditions to verify the existence and accessibility of the other sites. If Jake's data is correct, there are dozens of repositories throughout the galaxy, each containing specialized knowledge that could benefit all of our species." "I agree," said Dr. Chun, "but we need to proceed carefully and systematically. These sites have apparently been waiting for millions of years to be discovered. We should not rush into exploration without proper planning and preparation." Ambassador Velthan, a senior Vortanian diplomat, raised one of his crystal arms. "The Vortanian government is concerned about the strategic implications of these discoveries. If one species gains preferential access to advanced technologies, it could destabilize the balance of power throughout the galaxy." Jake had been sitting quietly during most of the discussion, but now he felt compelled to speak. "Ambassador Velthan, according to the repository database, the ancient civilization specifically designed these sites to prevent any single species from gaining unfair advantages. The information is structured so that it can only be fully understood and utilized through cooperation between multiple species." "What do you mean by that?" asked Dr. Foster. Jake activated the conference room's holographic display and showed one of the technical diagrams he had downloaded from the repository. "Look at this schematic for what appears to be an advanced propulsion system. The design requires materials that can only be produced by Vortanian crystal growing techniques, manufacturing processes that only the Veshans have mastered, and control systems that seem specifically adapted for luminary neural interfaces." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The ancient civilization had not just left behind advanced knowledge. They had structured that knowledge in a way that required cooperation and collaboration between different species to implement. "It's brilliant," Professor Yilmaz said, her tentacles moving in patterns that indicated excitement. The ancient civilization understood that lasting peace and prosperity in the galaxy could only be achieved through mutual dependence and cooperation. They designed their repositories to encourage exactly that kind of collaboration. Jake nodded. The database contains thousands of similar examples. Medical technologies that combine human biological understanding with Zephyrite chemical expertise. Agricultural systems that merge Centaurian environmental science with Theshan genetic manipulation. Even cultural and artistic projects that draw on the unique capabilities of different species. Ambassador Velthan's crystal skin shifted to a thoughtful blue color. "If what you say is true, then these repositories could actually promote galactic unity rather than threaten it. That appears to have been the ancient civilization's intention," Jake replied. "According to their historical records, they observed the development of intelligent life throughout the galaxy for millions of years. They saw how species often developed in isolation and then came into conflict when they encountered each other. The repository system was designed to provide a framework for peaceful cooperation and mutual advancement." Dean Kelther stood up and addressed the entire assembly. "Based on what we have learned today, I believe we should proceed with careful exploration of the other repository sites. However, this exploration should be conducted as a joint effort involving all major galactic species, with discoveries shared equally among all participants." The next several hours were spent organizing the most ambitious archaeological expedition in galactic history. Teams of scientists, engineers, and explorers from every major species would be dispatched to investigate the repository sites that Jake had identified. Each team would include representatives from multiple species to ensure that the cooperative approach intended by the ancient civilization could be implemented from the beginning. Jake was appointed as the chief coordinator for the expedition. Despite his youth and relatively low academic rank, his unique experience with the repository systems and his apparent ability to interface successfully with the ancient technology made him the obvious choice to lead the exploration effort. Over the following weeks, Jake worked with teams of experts to plan expeditions to more than 20 repository sites throughout the galaxy. Each site appeared to specialize in different areas of knowledge, from advanced physics and engineering to biology and medicine to arts and culture. The first follow-up expedition was to the Vega system, where Jake's data suggested there was a repository containing advanced manufacturing technologies. The expedition team included scientists and engineers from 6 different species. Along with Jake himself as the mission coordinator, the Vega repository was located in a massive underground complex beneath the surface of a dead world that had once been home to a thriving civilization. Unlike the caves on Kepler 442b, this site was clearly artificial, consisting of vast halls and chambers constructed from the same mysterious hybrid material that Jake had discovered earlier. The central repository structure at the Vega site was even more impressive than the one Jake had found on Kepler 442b. It was larger, more complex, and contained information systems that seemed to be specifically designed for multiple species to access simultaneously when the expedition team activated the Vega repository. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. The holographic displays showed detailed specifications for manufacturing processes that could produce materials with properties that seemed almost magical. Metals that were stronger than any known substance but lighter than air. Ceramics that could conduct electricity better than the best superconductors while remaining completely transparent. Polymers that could change their molecular structure in response to environmental conditions. Most importantly, the manufacturing processes required the combined expertise of multiple species to implement. The Vortanians could grow the necessary crystal matrices. The Veshans could provide the biological components. The Luminari could design the control systems, and humans could integrate all the different elements into functional devices. The success of the Vega expedition led to rapid approval for additional missions to other repository sites. Within 6 months, teams of galactic scientists were exploring ancient knowledge centers throughout known space, making discoveries that revolutionized virtually every field of science and technology. The medical repository near Alpha Centauri contained treatments for diseases that had plagued various species for thousands of years. The agricultural site in the Rigel system provided techniques for growing food in environments that had previously been considered uninhabitable. The cultural repository near Sirius held artistic and philosophical works that offered new perspectives on the meaning and purpose of intelligent life. But perhaps the most important discovery was not technological or scientific. As Jake had predicted, the repository system was creating unprecedented levels of cooperation and collaboration between different galactic species. Projects that would have been impossible for any single species to complete were being accomplished through joint efforts that combined the unique capabilities of multiple civilizations. Trade between species increased dramatically as each civilization specialized in producing components and materials that were needed by others. Scientific research accelerated as experts from different species shared knowledge and techniques. Cultural exchange flourished as beings from different worlds worked together on common projects. Jake's discovery had not just revealed ancient knowledge, it had provided a framework for building a truly unified galactic civilization.